Hey, why don't you come get something to eat? I know you hungry. Yo, today we're making a no-grill carne asada that's still hella flavorful and juicy, and you know I got it in the cookbook, so let's go. First things first, these are the essentials we're gonna need. So we have about 2 pounds of chuck roast here, and what we need to do first is get rid of any extra fat, silver skin, or gristle. When doing this, I like to use a boning knife to get a good trim on the meat. Just going between the seams of the protein and fat as cleanly as possible, being sure to keep your fingers clear of the sharp blade. As you separate the sections of meat, you'll be able to see any unwanted parts to discard. See? Here in the center of the roast is a big lining of hard fat that we don't necessarily want in our tacos, but we can use for rendering when we cook the meat, which I'll show you later on in the video. This is probably the most tedious part of the recipe, but in the end, it'll be worth the work. There's nothing worse than biting into a taco full of something you can't chew and don't want to swallow. Here's a piece of silver skin that was tucked in the beef. This was the only area I found with it, but every piece of meat is different, so keep an eye out for it. Almost a third of this roast was fat, which I don't mind, because beef fat is super tasty. And this is what we're left with, some nicely trimmed beef with some fat attached, and the trimmings to render. Go ahead and throw the trimmings in a pan on medium to medium low to render while we thinly slice the meat. Using your boning knife, slice the chuck about a 1/4 inch thick. The thinner the better with this cut of meat, since typically it needs to be ground or braised for a long period of time to become tender. It's very important that your knives be sharp for this step. A dull knife will result in ripped, inconsistent meat, rather than sliced, and a higher chance to cut yourself. This is about the thickness we're looking for. Nice and thin with enough texture to give us a meaty bite. Look at that, a great big pile of chuck ready for some marination. Grab yourself a resealable bag or Tupperware and load in the beef for seasoning. So in the bag goes Worcestershire sauce, soy sauce, lime zest, dried oregano, ground cumin, some light brown sugar, finely chopped cilantro, and some finely minced garlic. I'm going to show you what I do to keep that pesky garlic from sticking to your fingers. Just give it a good sprinkle of sea salt, then slice it thin. After that, start chopping it down into smaller pieces until it's nice and fine like Shawty across the street. Shazam! And see, look, it just slides off the knife. A little salt does the trick. Next, seal up your bag and give it a good mash around to coat the thinly sliced beef with the marinade. Yeah, just like that. Whoops. Don't want to forget the lime juice. This is going to give us some much needed acidity. And alright, one more mix around and it's time to put this baby in the fridge for at least an hour. And if you're feeling froggy, up to 4, but no longer than that, because it'll start to mess with the texture of the meat. Now let's check on that rendered beef fat. As you can see, most of the fat is melted, and we're left with all of the little chewy bits that look like delicious meat, but it ain't. A lot of taco trucks that aren't that great use this, and I call that no bueno. All we need is the delicious beef fat that's left behind to help us brown the meat and give us maximum flavor. Now let's make an awesome fire roasted salsa to pair with the carne asada. Starting with the Roma tomatoes, slice them in half lengthwise and remove the upper core where the stems will be. In the medium to large pan over high heat, char your onion and jalapenos. You don't have to slice them. I just had these left over from the house-made pickled jalapeno recipe. As the heat rises, the outside of the veg will begin to caramelize and then blacken, which is exactly what we want for this fresh salsa. We don't really want these to soften at all, just a quick char to give a little smoky element. If it looks like this, then we're good. A nice toasty char to the exterior, and now for the tomatoes. They hold a lot more moisture than the onion and jalapeno, so make sure the pan is ripping hot to get some good color. Place them face down in an even layer, and after a few minutes, you should develop some pretty pro-level roasted goodness on the outside. I did this in 2 batches, but if your pan is large enough, go for it. Place the tomatoes in a bowl, and I think we're ready to salsa, if you know what I mean. With a chef's knife, cut the onion into quarters and toss them into a blender along with the charred jalapenos, a nice handful of fresh cilantro, and our beautiful tomatoes, if I do say so myself. I suggest only loading half of the tomatoes in at first to kind of pulse everything down and then toss in the rest. Some fresh water is going to help thin this out some, and if you like a chunkier salsa, by all means, use a little less water and pulse instead of blend. After that, a little granulated sugar goes in, as well as some sea salt and a good splash of white vinegar for balance. Then pop on the lid and pulse it a few times. Then let it rip. Add in the remaining tomatoes and blend until the desired consistency is reached. And give it a taste for seasoning. I threw in a little more cilantro, vinegar, and some salt for my liking. Don't be afraid to taste your food, folks. That was my biggest issue when I started cooking. If you want to be a boss in the kitchen, don't have no shame in your game. Know what I'm saying? Pour the sauce in a serving dish or sealed container. This recipe makes a ton, so it's perfect for parties or even a Mexican breakfast the next morning. Plus it doubles as a snack while everyone waits for the carne asada. Let's get some of that rendered fat back into the pan. And once it melts, sear the beef over high heat. Make sure it's in an even layer for the best browning. I like to season the beef lightly with sea salt and a tiny bit of MSG to give it that street taco taste. Totally optional, but I say go for it. After 5 or 6 minutes on one side, stir the carne to cook it through, and just like that, we're done. Take your carne to a clean board and give it a rough chop to break it down. Just enough to increase the volume without killing the texture. I don't know about you, but this screams my favorite taco truck. Perfectly seasoned and very juicy. Take some warm tortillas and fill them with your no-grill carne, and don't skimp. Give these babies all the meat they can handle. Next, our fire roasted salsa goes down. This is going to add that acidic punch to cut the richness of the beef. I go heavy here because tacos should be juicy. Then some diced white onion and fresh cilantro. House-made pickled jalapenos will give this a nice bright kick. They're a little spicy, so unless your kids like Takis, I wouldn't do it to them. And I think it's safe to say, we did it! A little bit of tender love and care, and we've got taqueria-style carne asada tacos at home with minimal dishes to wash. Look at God.